Hey everyone, how's it going? Might just wait a couple more seconds just for more folks to start coming in. Looks like people are still continuing to trickle in a little bit. Maybe a couple more seconds, then we'll get going for the sake of time. Cool. Hey, so thanks for everyone for joining. Wanted to start off just by saying hi and hope everyone is doing well. My name is Joey and I'm a design advocate at Figma, but I'm based over here in East Bay within the Bay Area. And like many of you, I'm at home, just trying to figure out how to live and work through all of this and kind of exist in the current situation. Last week, my focus was all about like how to work effectively at home. And this week's a little bit different where I'm kind of realizing I can only be so productive given everything that's going on. So we're faced with this, unique situation that we're all having to navigate together. And I'm really glad that so many of you came on today just to join us. We definitely hope to continue creating spaces to talk about design and life. So today, we're focusing on remote design crits. And so many of you have been doing remote design crits for a while now, and it may be completely new to others. So today we're going to hear from four amazing speakers on how they and their team managed remote crits. And they'll introduce themselves in a bit. And yeah, we hope that you will also introduce yourselves in chat as well. It looks like there's a lot of conversations already happening in the Zoom chat. Feel free to pop in there and share anything or ask questions. So like I said, definitely use the Zoom chat. I'll be monitoring it. If you have questions, I'll try to ask in between or get those to the panelists in between as we switch. And lastly, if you're sitting in there with a topic in mind or things that you want to talk about, suggest that too. We definitely want to hear at Figma. Our goal is to do these at least once a week, and we want to make sure that we have things that are to talk about that are actually interesting to everyone and beneficial. So with that, let's dive in. Also, full transparency, this is our first time doing something like this via Zoom. I think it'll work out just fine, but bear with us in case we run into anything. So with that, let me advance our slide here. So here are our four speakers today. We're super excited to kick this off with Debbie Sorkin from Apartment List. She's their Senior Director of Design. We've got Linda Eliason on from Help Scout, VP of Design. Matt Plays, also from Help Scout as a Marketing Director. And then finally, our very own Noah Levin from Figma, who is our Director of Design. So I just wanted to go over really quickly, just at the intro, and we're actually gonna kick this off with Debbie. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and Debbie, I'll let you go ahead and start. And thanks again, everyone, for joining. It's so nice to have human connection and to see everyone and to have you on today.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? All right, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. How about now, can everybody see me? Okay, awesome. All right, oops. All right, so I'm Debbie and I lead our design and user research team at Apartment List. Really excited to be here today. I should say, I'm by no means an expert in remote design critiques. This is something I think we're all navigating as we go, but these are some skills that I think will be as a reflection of just, the state of the world and where we're at. It's nice to really share our tips and tricks together and yeah, figure out as we go how to handle this fun time. All right, so my initial thoughts when I was sort of thinking about what I wanted to share with you all when it came to how to best really share some of my thoughts and processes around how to conduct a really smart remote design crit. It really at the end of the day, there are best practices that are independent of your location. So some teams are always going to be remote. Some teams will have a combination of in-house and remote, and some teams will always be in-house. So it really, I look at a lot of this as actually, no matter where you're at, some of these are the best practices we should be using. So first, I think this is one of those rules that it applies to all. Some, you should wear pants, whether you're home or not while you're working. But no, in all seriousness, I want to walk through, basically what it means to have a sort of a smart preparation time, sort of what setup looks like once you're in the critique with your team, and then talk specifically about some unique aspects of remote crits, and then we'll save questions, it sounds like, for everyone at the end. All right, so first and foremost, it's all about alignment on goals and sort of what that looks like. This is not just the sole responsibility of the designer. I should say before going in, this is definitely a little bit more product design focused, so just keep that in mind. Has the one-pager been written by your product manager? Has there been a team kickoff? Are there any outstanding questions that any of the team members have around some analytics or research? Are there any technical concerns or technical constraints that you need to know about from the project ahead of time? So once you're sort of clear on sort of what those goals are, then it's time to start designing. And I think Figma is a fantastic tool that really enables remote collaboration. So using the commenting feature on Figma is something we use frequently at my team. And really it's about then inviting the right people to your session. For us, it's about the people who are going to be signing off on the project, core team members that might be not specific to design or product. So whether that's domain expertise or other members of your team. I think it's important to have design peers to get that, that perspective as well. And really at the end of the day, we don't want to have too many people in the session because too many, I think, makes for hard conversation and dialogue. This is a really important one as well. I think it's important to walk into your crit session with a strong opinion loosely held. It's okay to have a strong opinion. It's something I encourage my team to really embrace. But really understanding that you should never be too married to any one sort of output or solution. And of course, walking into the crit where you're going to be aligned with your product partner is super important as well. Okay, so once the crit has been set up and scheduled, then you can walk in and then it's sort of like the initial setup stage of a design crit. And what that looks like for us is to really identify what the people problem is and what the target persona is. So it's really clear to the team that this is also something, we're vetting our ideas based on research and information that we've heard from the people that we speak to. I think it's really important to be clear about the type of feedback you want to receive. So projects could be at different stages. You could be in a low fidelity state and you're just trying to get a sense of an interaction or more of like a strategy or something like that. And it might not be ready for visual feedback. Or you might want specifically visual feedback or specific feedback on an animation or things like that. It's really important to be clear to set those expectations up front. And then lastly, I think it really need to say what the goal is of the meeting. So what do you need to have discussed in order to be unblocked? I think this is really critical and plays a pretty core part in sort of having an overall successful critique. Okay, so for the uniqueness of like being remote specifically is, so actually a colleague of mine shared this with me and I thought it was interesting. So there's this professor over at UCLA named Albert Mehrabian, and there's something called the 7-38-55 rule, which basically tells us that like the perception of a person, what they actually say is such a small portion of what they're really trying to convey, and so much of this is outside of what they're saying, and it comes down to their tone of voice and their body language. So, how do you account for body language when you're remote? It's actually really hard. So, make sure you can see people's faces, be on gallery view in Zoom. I think that especially nowadays where everyone's sort of in this remote setting, it's super important to also say like, hey, I'm at work, I'm present, and I'm going to be turning my camera on so you can see me. That way you know that people are really engaged, and you can sort of read people's faces as you go. It's also really important to bake in pauses to your presentation. So sometimes we have a tendency to want to explain all the things, and I think it's really important in order to really help people digest information. It's important to share it in smaller chunks. And then also soliciting feedback from people who you know are more reserved. So let's say I have a colleague in the session where I know she's fantastic at visual design, but she's quiet and more reserved. I will probably in certain sections pause and solicit feedback specifically from her in order to make sure I'm getting the kind of feedback I want from everybody in the room. I think lean on your colleagues, like as right now I'm presenting, so it's a little bit hard for me to assess what's going on sort of from all the people in the room. I think it's lean on your partners and to really help you take notes of people's expressions. Maybe you can, they can note like, oh, so-and-so just unmuted themselves. That would be a good opportunity to then solicit what it was that they wanted to say if they're having a hard time sort of chiming in at that point. Zoom also has a really great feature that I only recently learned about, where it's the raising hand feature. If you have your panel or participant panel open, then you can actually see people physically raising their hands, which is a really nice tool that we've been using as well. And then technical difficulties. So this is something that I am learning all too well, even just actually before we hopped on the call. My Zoom link wasn't working. So you have to kind of lean into the awkwardness and just know everybody's experiencing it in some capacity. And the good news is about teams who are now all fully remote, it's expected and we can fully sort of like empathize with one another there. Super important to keep track of time. I think in order to feel like you are going to really be unblocked, it's important that you're keeping track of time. Zoom does have a feature where it gives you like a countdown when the meeting is going to end. I think there's better ways that you can do it where it feels less stressful. And I think just being clear and sort of time boxing the pacing of your meeting is super important, so that you know, okay, I've got 5 or 10 minutes left. And ask yourself, am I actually unblocked yet on the conversation? And then it's super important once you do get unblocked and you get the feedback you need, is to summarize this feedback before the end of logging off. And then use Slack and other channels, other written channels, to then articulate your next steps to the team. So we'll save questions, it sounds like, to the end. That is all from my side of the world. Hopefully you guys learned some new tips and tricks, and yeah, thanks for having me.
We actually have a little bit of time just until Linda, once you're up next, but there were a couple of questions that came in that I wanted to just surface. So one of them was, how many people are like too many people within a crit? Do you try to keep them small? Do you try to keep them larger? Where's that like sweet spot have you found?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've heard and read that anything more than 8 people is what really then becomes unmanageable. So like the 7 or 8 number is sort of the sweet spot that we try and sort of keep within.
And then another one that I am always curious about is, sometimes it can feel hard for designers to give feedback or to like create that safe space. Do you have any tips that you found of just getting everyone involved and forming that sort of inclusion within the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really a cultural perspective. I think that, you know, at Apartment List specifically, we have a lot of ad hoc discussions and conversations where we are quite inclusive. So I think setting expectations up front with the group, and even if it means like calling out specific folks' names that where you know that maybe it might be harder for them to speak up, but sort of giving them a platform by saying, you know, I would really love to hear specifically from X, Y, and Z ahead of time, so that they're sort of we're setting up the stage for them so they then feel comfortable to then speak up. And I think it really does fall on the person who is leading the meeting. I think that you sort of become that leader, and it's important, I should say, also the people that you're partnering with on the project to really step up and make sure you're facilitating people feeling comfortable.
And then we've got two more here, which I'll ask. So what do you think are the benefits of live in-person / in-video feedback versus asynchronous feedback, you know, such as like leaving comments on a file or within a document?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, so, and something that we sort of go back and forth with often. I think that there gets to be a point in a Google Doc where if you have, there's so many comments that are going on, it then becomes actually quite hard to manage the conversation. So it's sort of on us to then sort of take a step back and say, okay, is this really productive, or would it actually be much quicker to just have an in-person conversation? In terms of, you know, I think also being aware of the stakeholders that are involved in their time, and sometimes it's hard to really get their feedback, and that's why sometimes sort of setting time aside for these design crits is really critical to sort of getting then unblocked by the people who have to really sign off on that.
That's an awesome answer. Yeah. All right. One more question here, and then we'll transition over to Linda and Matt next. Does your critique style change depending on what part of the UX process that you're in?
I think in terms of the setup and facilitating sort of best practices for remote, I feel like honestly that applies across the board. But I think in terms of what aspect of the design process you're digging into, it obviously can look different. I think, for example, if you're talking about super nitty-gritty visual or interaction feedback, you might not need all like a product stakeholder to be there, but you would probably want the design leads to be there to make sure that they're signing off. So I think just being, I can see the audience sort of changing based on what it is that you need to discuss.
Awesome. Debbie, thanks so much. That was really great. Super cool to hear a little bit more about how you're doing and thinking about these. So thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Linda and Matt, do you mind sharing your screen?
Hi. Thanks for having us. I'm Linda.
I'm Matt, please. Good to meet y'all.
And we're going to talk you through a little bit of our entire design process because the critique is one part of it. And I think that you'll notice as a lot of people are becoming remote, that when you're remote and you're doing asynchronous communication, feedback kind of comes and trickles in all along the design process of like any project. So Matt and I have actually been kind of refining our own process and how we do this for like the last year, because HealthScout's been remote for a while, and our team has been remote for the last couple of years. So we're just gonna share some of the stuff that works with us. And I want to give all of this advice with a grain of salt or with the asterisk of everybody's team is unique. Everyone's time zones are different. So you really do have to iterate on this process the way that we have to find what actually works for you. But with that said, here's what we do. So at the start of every project, whether it's marketing or product or whatever, we kick off with a project over Zoom in a call. Even if it takes 15 minutes for something small, I think it's really important for people to be there having these conversations. So what we do is we outline what we call the ARPA. And I think Debbie kind of spoke to this a little bit, but basically just defining who's accountable for this project, who's responsible to get it done, who is going to participate in the process, and who is here to advise along the way. So sometimes that's, you know, product specialists or PMs. And in this case, the responsible person is usually the designer. But by setting this up at the beginning of a project, you're making it clear and documenting it on paper to everyone who's going to be involved with the process. Like, hey, this is what I need from you during this project, and I'm going to check in with you along the way, just so that there are no like unknowns or mysteries.
Yeah, and we do this as like a paper doc, which has like a bunch of helpful links so we can branch off for whatever we need in the project. Also, the brief oftentimes contains things like crazy egg data to kind of help back up our decisions and bring the team into the problem we need to solve. So it's a pretty good jump off point.
Yeah, so we're going to show you, recently we redesigned our homepage. So we're just going to show you our homepage project and more or less how this process went.
Here's just to loop you into the full, like, in the weeds kind of tools that we use to get this going. We track all of our progress in Asana. We usually have a project channel in Slack. All of this just keeps it so people can check in on it asynchronously, and find different avenues to kind of tackle the problem at hand. Typically our Asana documents or projects are set up so you can actually visually see like where we are and what's left to do. And I find it super helpful to kind of keep the project rolling and know what's to come.
Yeah, Matt is especially good at those. I suck at it. We all have our own strengths. And then we work together on wireframes, the advisors and the designers together.
Yeah, we do some like lo-fi sketching too in Figma, which just helps us like, it keeps us the wireframes in the design tool that we're using so we can reference them super easily without having to bounce anywhere else. And it just keeps us moving quickly. And we have like fully embraced working in the same doc together at the same time. It feels pretty cool. We even do it sometimes for like illustration sketches. We get things in there for placement. And it just really starts to help everybody chip in and get to the end of the project sooner and kind of set expectations along the way. Then for design review, we have a couple different avenues of how we do this. Our like marketing design team meets twice a week on Mondays and Wednesdays. So if we have a project, we typically try to have something to show in those meetings on a Monday and a Wednesday, so we kind of know that cadence. But if we need to do something like off the cuff, we can just Slack each other and do a little pairing session via Zoom. Like here's kind of one with me and Eric doing a little animation and like this is the homepage pair. So we kind of just talk through things and we just get to a solution quicker if you get in a room and kind of get consensus just by like meeting up with a second colleague. And the other cool thing that we do, this is just a totally different avenue and like a totally different audience too, is we create these work in progress documents in paper. And here's where we actually like share pretty regular updates to the larger project team so they can kind of chime in, see progress and give feedback. We've got links to Figma if folks want to see it full screen and really dive in and maybe see some interaction and animation. And we give folks comps so that they can comment in context, and it just keeps everybody in the loop.
Yeah, and what I really like about these is that sometimes you need to get like the CEO's opinion on something, but you don't want to have to drag him into every single design review that you have. You just want to make sure that he has passive access to the work that's being done. So every now and then in a Slack channel dedicated to the project, Matt will just say, hey, just so you know that WIP doc has been updated if you want to go and take a look. And so then CEO can pop in whenever he has time, and he'll usually just like leave a thumbs up or like a magical rainbow GIF or whatever is necessary.
Yeah, you know you did well if you got the sticker. We also just wanted to like loop y'all into, we're using libraries in Figma. They're actually pretty connected too. We have a series of them. Some like global things like color and baseline type styles are in our core library, and other more specific libraries are used for more granular parts of the business. And this just keeps us consistent and keeps us moving super quickly. It's a pretty cool thing. And another thing that we just wanted to point out too is just how we iterate. We typically are using pages to kind of mark big milestones and big changes in the document. And this just helps us so we can reference old work really quickly and kind of keep pushing things until it gets to the right spot.
I love, I just want to interrupt, sorry. One thing I love about this is that, that thing that happens in design review where somebody like suggests something to you that you already tried like 7 versions ago. And you're like, you want to be like, yes, 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 I tried it. Don't worry about it. So it's great to just be able to click back to that version, show them what they're asking to see, and then they can get onto your page quicker.
Totally. And if you want to do something on the fly, it's easy to just duplicate your page and then kind of roll from there and start with a fresh slate. We also leverage prototyping quite a bit just to prove concepts quickly and to help just like demonstrate interactions really, really visually, just to kind of keep it so we don't waste too much time in the build process. And sometimes things are just harder to describe and it's just easier to show it. So we use this quite a bit, oftentimes with just little parts of the page. Like here's just like showing some hero interaction and like a toggle situation, but it just helps folks kind of see what you're thinking. We also use the comments function pretty well with our team, kind of on a team level, as opposed to a feedback level. This kind of keeps everybody in the loop. We include specs, interaction guidance, and just if there are questions, we can leave it in context. But for the most part, at least the way we've been using it, there are so many ways you could, but the way we've been using it is like to kind of chat with engineers and other designers. We also point out sometimes too when something might be useful or used elsewhere on the site, so that folks can like reference it and make sure that we don't kind of double up on work, which is nice. And this is kind of where we netted out with this homepage project to kind of close the loop on it. It's currently live, but it was a pretty cool guinea pig for how we do projects here at Help Scout.
Linda, Matt, that was awesome. Thank you so much. It's really cool to see the use of prototyping within this deck here too. A couple questions came in that I would love to ask you both. We've got a couple of minutes. The first one, which I think is really important, is someone asked, at my current agency, we don't have any design crits at all. How can I pitch the importance of them and how they'll benefit the team? So were these always seen as a very positive thing at Help Scout, or was there any like push that you had to do? And do you have advice for someone who is in that position?
Yeah, have design critiques. Oh my gosh. I think that as a designer, there's nothing scarier than feeling like you're all on your own in the design process, because you could make it for weeks all the way to the very end and then have something killed or something major needs to change. It's so important to get vulnerable fast with each other on your projects. And for our team, we have Mondays and Wednesdays for marketing designers and Tuesdays and Thursdays for product designers. And those design critique sessions are sacred. Like they're always on the calendar, no matter what. But sometimes people don't really have stuff to show, so they'll just pop in for 5 minutes just to say, hey, it's never like a misuse of time to just check in with one another, even if it's just used for social time. But yeah, to stress the importance of it to the people that are working with you. You can talk to them about how much time this could potentially save in the future. If you talk about all of the projects that have had to have been restarted when you could have gotten crucial information earlier on, that's money, it's a big deal. Matt, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting. If you need to ease into it as well, you might try pairing sessions too. I think that helps you learn how to be vulnerable with like someone you're already comfortable with, and then you can kind of build a larger group when you have some confidence in the work that you're showing and things like that. But it's definitely, as someone who has spun his wheels more than once, it's worthwhile to get together and kind of make sure you can kind of correct the ship a little bit and get eyes on it, because sometimes you have blinders as a designer, so it's worth getting in a room with people.
So maybe on that note, this kind of feeds into a next question of, do you have any advice for, like, once you get past, pitching that these are, valuable, do you have any advice on how to, I guess, like, how do designers prepare for this, or how do designers at Help Scout, like, think about critiques and, like, what they should bring to it? Are they the same every time, or do they kind of differ again with maybe what the project might be?
Well, Matt does this really well. Every time we have a design critique, he shows up super prepared. So I'm going to let him talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like since we have such a regular cadence of review, it's kind of expected that you're not always at the same stage of the project. And so I like that we've set it up that way, so people kind of get little bite-sized updates. And I think the key is just to, try to preface the, review and the presentation with what you want to get from it and where you're at, just to kind of set the expectation and I guess give your teammates the best chance of helping you out. I think that's really kind of the crux of it, is just setting the expectation of what you want to get out of it, where you're at, and where you expect to be coming out of the review.
And one way to build community with your fellow designers is to close loops. If they suggested something to you in a previous design critique, show them how you thought about it. Show them how you actually took their advice and put it into your design, whether it worked or whether it didn't. I think that can help to build your bond with each other and helps you to build trust with each other faster.
I love that a lot. And one thing that's come up are a couple of questions that I've seen are, comments can be everywhere, right? Like, after a little bit of time, you can have comments in Figma and Paper and Slack. And like, a couple of folks were interested of, like, how do you curate those, or how do you, place those in one area where everyone can see and everyone can kind of level up together? Do you have a process for that yet?
Yeah, so there are definitely 6 different avenues to get feedback. We tend to share things in Slack, and when you share it, that is the time to let people know how to give you feedback. I have one designer who makes a lot of Loom videos, and he'll say, I'm looking for feedback on this specifically, please leave it in the comments in Loom, or please leave a thread on this Slack message. So it's kind of up to the designer to ask specifically, not just what kind of advice I'm looking for or critique I'm looking for, but also where to leave me that feedback. But it still does become kind of messy. So it becomes your job to, like, sweep together all of the comments that you've gotten.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's so easy, like how many comments can come in and just how scattered they can be really quickly. Maybe one last question here is, I think something that we've all probably struggled with, of when and how do you decide what feedback to take? Like, how often do you find yourselves relying on design instinct, previous projects and previous successes versus like metrics or comments from stakeholders? I think that's something that's maybe the ongoing battle of critiques.
Matt, do you have any advice?
I feel like one of the reasons we picked this project was because it was so well-rounded, in that we had data to back things up, which we definitely value quite a bit at Help Scout. But also we pay attention to qualitative data and anecdotal references from other folks on the team to kind of balance that data-driven mentality. So I think our decisions are based on this combination of all those things, and we are kind of empowered to use our best judgment given the information. Just as long as we're not ignoring information and just processing it in a cool way that seems to succeed, I think that's kind of what we're able to do. This project, for one, too, was an A/B test. So we did get some data from it, and we're continuously iterating on it. And now we're putting the winner of that A/B test against a version of itself. So it's a pretty cool process that I just think, yeah, it's good to just go ahead, Linda. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, to build your case. If you're going to quote ignore somebody's feedback and go with your own gut, it's just good to build a case around that. Matt and I just had to do that last week with a project where somebody had a really strong opinion and we kind of felt opposite. So what we did is we just built a really compelling case said, look, we hear you, we know why you want it to be this way, but here's how it could also be. And so just make people feel heard, make them feel seen, and let them know that like, I hear you and I want to meet you in the middle, and here's what I propose.
So Matt, Linda, thank you so much. That was awesome. Thanks so much for answering those questions too. So up next, we have Noah, Figma's Director of Design. And just a quick note, we're gonna be taking, I know there's a lot of questions in here, we're gonna be taking these and answering them and then emailing them out after. So if we didn't have a chance to answer your question live, we'll definitely try to get you an answer with that email. So with that, I'll share it to Noah now.
Awesome, thanks Joey. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if this works. One sec. Can you see this? Thumbs up. Can you see what I'm seeing? Good. I see a thumbs up, so I feel like we're good to go. Awesome. So I'm also going to kind of similar to like how Linda and Matt just did, kind of give you an overview of our whole design process in a way, just because critiques again are just one piece of that. For some context, this is our current team at Figma, our current product design team. There are 9 of us. And we work on all different kinds of areas of Figma, both the editor and outside of the editor. And this is what our schedule looked like pre-COVID stuff. And actually, this is what our schedule looks like post-COVID stuff. So it's actually not changed too much in terms of the actual cadence in which we meet, with the exception of this new coffee we added in the morning. We wanted to keep a lot of the regularity of the traditions and rituals that we had, but just adapt them to make sure that they work even better for our new remote context. So just to kind of run you through them really quickly and what they're about. The coffee one is just an optional time in the morning. We just leave this little Zoom hangout open. And if people are free, they come in. And if they're not, they don't. There's no pressure. Like usually we get a couple people, maybe 1 or 2, maybe they're on our team showing us her coffee cup collection, which is kind of fun. And we have a little playlist. In Zoom, it turns out you can share music, which I didn't realize you could do, which is kind of fun. So Rasmus made this playlist and it kind of has a bunch of jazz in it. It's kind of fun. Just a good way to like kind of keep our ritual that we would normally have in person anyway, like when you go and you sit down and you get to talk to each other and hang out, like trying to keep that feeling more normal. And we found this to be a really special time in the morning that we can just use to just hang out. This is Nico showing us some hack project he's working on, I don't know. We have this thing we call warm-up, which is how we start the week. And warm-ups are a really important part of our process, and they actually relate to critiques. What we do is we start by going around the room and recapping our weekend and going over some highlights from the week before. And then we actually go into planning the critiques ahead of time. This is something we felt like we started to have to do as our team scaled up the way that it did. Just a quick note, when I said around the room, that's what we would normally do in person. We realized the room doesn't work when you're digital. So we have to like now, when each person shares their weekend update, they like point to a person. They're like, hey, like, all right, Heather, you're next, things like that. Just a little thing that's kind of made it more fun so that, you know, normally, again, you could sort of go easily around a room, now you can. So that kind of worked for us. This is what our warm-up doc looks like. We keep it in Notion, and we have, you know, we've been doing this for a while. And as you look into what we do, like we use this as a chance to, as we go around, to check in and say, all right, who is ready for crit this week and which? You don't have to know that you're ready, because obviously you're still working on stuff regularly. You might not know until the night before, but oftentimes you kind of do. And you're kind of like, you know what, this could be a good little deadline for me. This could be a thing that I know that I could hold myself accountable to. We don't have any more than 2 topics per crit, because we always assume it takes longer than you think. And so minimum time is 30 minutes. Sometimes we'll do a full hour. And so usually, as you're seeing here, like we'll have basically 2 topics, you know, 2 people for each one. We do them twice a week, Wednesdays and Fridays, and that's to make space for other types of meetings we have, which I'll go over in a bit. Planning it ahead of time seems to really help, because we can also update it on the calendar. We Slack it in a public channel we call Design Crit. So I'll basically, whenever we have that schedule, say, hey, everyone, here's our current schedule. And that way, like, people know if their PM or engineering lead should go, they can keep themselves accountable to bring those people. We do like to invite at least the core contributors. We don't want the whole engineering team there, of course. We usually keep it to just product design, with the exception of maybe the main PM or the main engineer on that project too. They often can help provide extra context, which can be really helpful. We update the calendar event names as well, so that everyone even they remember even further like what this is about. These seem like small details, but they actually add up a lot in terms of remembering like what's going on and keeping everyone on track. So we have a team meeting every Monday at 4. And this is where we talk about things that aren't about product feedback. They're not about projects. They're actually about our team health, about the things that we need to do together, things like recruiting, our career ladders, our design principles. It's a regular space in which each week we can do that. We also schedule that ahead of time in that same warm-up meeting. So here's an example of the one we did this week. So this is, we jumped into a Figma file, and we wanted to basically brainstorm how to work better remotely. So we, ahead of time, came up with these different categories. So like critiques, feedback asynchronously, culture, helping the company, helping the Figma community, and helping the world. And we basically, everyone came up with like different things they thought would be interesting, and then we bucketed them into next steps, which is what's shown below. We kind of, after like voting on them a little bit or thinking about what made sense, we wanted to take action on some of them to change our process. At the end of the week, so we have warm up in the beginning, we have cool down at the end. And this is a really important time for us as well, even though it's a lot less serious than the other things that we do. This is a chance for us to really just like goof off, have fun, like play a game, learn something new, share about our week, check in and see how we're feeling. And so this is one we had with the broader design team, including Brand as well, where we all just went around and talked about how we were feeling about all of the stuff going on right now. And we felt like opening up this space for your team to be able to talk about it made it a lot easier for other people to also feel comfortable doing so. If they felt stressed and they didn't really know how to say it, when someone else kind of started by saying that they felt that way, it really made it feel more safe. But we also use it to play these silly games to kind of lighten the mood. So here's a game that our engineering team taught us around drawing animals, where you basically have like 5 seconds to draw an animal and you kind of move on and you pick your favorite. It's super fun, super goofy. It can't be long enough so that you like stress out making it done well. Figma Telephone, here's one if you've ever played like the pictogram kind of drawing games where you like have a word, someone has to draw what that last word was, the next person has to write what they think that drawing was, and then over time you end up with a totally different drawing. So it's sort of a super fun game. We played Guess Who the other day. This is a trick that basically where you draw someone without lifting the pencil up in the up from like what would normally be paper, but in this case in Figma. And so these end up with like really funny, interesting portraits. Vicky Tan taught me this. She did this at Config, and this is like kind of a fun way to try it digitally. You end up with all kinds of funny little descriptions. Finally, like before jumping into crits and more about them, like we have this queue we use throughout the week. This is in Notion as well. This is where we store topics that we thought about throughout the week, but we didn't remember. And so maybe this just basically helps to remind us, oh, right, that could be a good topic for the next one. And anyone can add to this over time throughout the course of the week. Critiques, the main topic of this stuff. So the main thing we wanted to start from was sort of like a bit of a philosophy on what we think crits are for and what they're not for, and the tone that we want them to feel like. And in particular, I think a lot of times critiques can feel kind of scary. They can feel like really intimidating. They can feel like someone's gonna maybe tear your work apart. But really, in an ideal world, if we do our jobs well, they should feel super motivating. They should feel super helpful, uplifting. They should actually, even in some cases, be kind of fun. It's kind of, for me, it's like, the best part of being on a design team is getting to work with other designers. A lot of times you don't get that luxury, and to be able to do that is really a privilege. And so trying to recognize that and put some time into making sure that the tone feels appropriate and fun and helpful, still serious if there's a problem, but enough so that no one can really feel like, anyone's after them as a person, but it's really just about uplifting the ideas. It wasn't always like that for us. Earlier on when we were doing critiques, we felt like there were too many people in the room. Almost everyone in the company was going to them, or a lot of people were. The feedback was a little bit too shallow. A lot of times you have this group think when we would speak verbally and people would just start to agree with each other, and it was hard to get real meaningful feedback. And also you would end up with, sort of that one person who said something that set the tone for all the other feedback that you got. So we learned a lot of tricks along the way after realizing that this wasn't working and starting to brainstorm how to improve it. So similar to that remote brainstorm, this was our brainstorm. Literally sat down in Figma and went through what's working, what isn't, what do we want this to look like, and try to be more intentional about our process. And we also kept that so that wouldn't just happen in one point in time. We have a critique channel we call Design Crit, which was making sure that the critiques themselves felt good over time. So this is actually a Slack channel where we basically could ongoing share articles about critiques or things that made the process of them better. And even flagging, hey, that one didn't feel so good, why is that? And so this kept an ongoing dialogue, which was helpful for us. So the goals, again, not so much about if they're stuck. They should be about elevating the quality of the work happening in the company. They should be about encouraging consistency where it's appropriate and sharing context about what's going on. Designers are in this really unique position to understand a lot of things happening in the company. If you're an engineer, you might be pretty tunnel visioned into your particular project. And as a designer, you often get this perspective of getting to see all these different things. So we like to even have critiques sometimes be a space where you're just sharing information as well can be helpful. So with those goals in mind, we wanted to make sure that people also didn't see this as a meeting where product decisions happen. This depends on your company, the size and stage. At an earlier stage in the company, Figma, before they had product reviews, actually we did have these as decision-making meetings in a way. And as we grew and as we added a product management function, we realized that it made more sense to have a separate product review process with that core team and use that as the avenue to make decisions, so that critique could remain a really safe space where feedback was happening more about just improving things, but the decisions were left to the product teams. We didn't want design to become this like kind of hold back or bottleneck to projects where everything had to go to critique before it launched. Ideally it does, but really it's about empowering, uplifting, and improving, not about gatekeeping. And so that was an important distinction we had to make early on, so people would feel comfortable sharing as much as they could and have a separate venue for actual like the gatekeeping that might need to happen in a larger company. So that said, we have a bunch of critique types. One of these is no longer relevant in a remote world, but the rest of them are. So I thought they were still helpful to go through. So we're gonna go through each of these really quick, as long as I'm good on time. I think I'm good. So a standard critique is probably what you're all most familiar with. This is where you share a bunch of context about the project you're working on, and you basically ideally have some feedback you're looking for. And after explaining all that context, you pause, you ask for clarifying questions. This is an important thing that we do, so that like you don't mix feedback with questions in the same time. A lot of times feedback should come in the form of questions, but the goal of this is to make sure everyone is on the same page. And the reality is it's possible when someone's presenting something that a bunch of people are confused. They don't know what the actual context is. So there needs to be this chunk of time that's like, all right, before we go into feedback about if this is working or not, does anyone have any clarifying questions? So we separate a good 5 minutes for that, at least, sometimes 10, before we go into feedback. When we go into feedback, we either do it, ideally we do it where we actually go around the room. Now, again, in this world, we have to kind of point out the next person. We do this because sometimes people don't feel comfortable speaking, and it's not ideal to have one vocal person take up the entire space. And so instead, by going around the room, we have a little abbreviations if we want to remind people what the format we want is. The presenter gets to choose the format that they want. So they can both pick from these 6 types, and they also can pick the type of feedback people are giving. We try to avoid popcorn, like going around. Sometimes we do if we're short on time, or if there's no one else in a vacuum saying anything. Next up are jams and workshops. This is a great opportunity that people often forget to do, and this can happen asynchronously. This can happen outside of critiques too, but we want critiques to be a space where we can actually make stuff together as well. And so if someone wants to, they can actually do a little bit of a jam or a Figma jam, whatever you want to call it, and actually go in and like improve stuff. So this is on the right, like we had an intern who was working on comments, and they'd set up basically like, hey, how do you all want this to work? So before they got too deep into the project, they could get all this early on feedback from the team, which was kind of a cool thing to think about. I think usually people think of critiques as, here's my finished design, what do you think? But sometimes it can be good to bring other kinds of problems to it. We also do pair design. These are pictures that are no longer possible for us right now, but you can imagine this happening in Zoom quite well, just as Linda and Matt shared that they do as well, which is great. This is super helpful. We try to encourage it. We probably don't do it as much as we want to, but we'd really like to make sure that people can pair up. At one point, we actually did this intentionally during critique time, where we would split into groups. So we would have the critique time, we'd partner up, and then we'd all go into separate channels or rooms when we were in person. So this can happen in those critique times if you want it to, if you want more explicit feedback. It also lets you do more topics at once. Now, this is our #1 most common form of critique, especially right now. This is something that was at first unusual, but became quickly our favorite and our most common way of actually getting feedback. We decided that like when you go around the room, you're limiting the kinds of conversations that can happen. Even if you go around the room, you're helping to account for people who are more vocal, but you're still a one-track channel. But if you're actually heads down all in the same space, adding sticky notes to a concept like this, you can have multiple tracks at the same time and get a lot more depth in your feedback. So I would say about 70 or 80% of our critiques are done this way, where they're actually, we're all just in this room, but we're not even talking. We are for the clarifying questions, maybe at the beginning, hey, what is this thing about? But we primarily spend our time adding these little sticky notes. In this case, we don't use our own feature around comments because it helps to be able to see a range of ideas more visually. We're actually working on improving the comments feature itself in case that it can capture some use cases like this. But in particular, we find this really helpful and to getting depth and to getting a lot more in buds. We're not do anymore until we're back in person. FYIs are like, if anyone needs like a 5-minute blurb during that meeting to be like, hey, heads up, here's something I'm working on. I just wanted to explain it in person rather than just Slack because maybe there's some nuance to it. We don't do those quite as often. So the goal is that by having all of these different method types, we try to like have the designer pick what they want based on what they think is most helpful. So in the morning, whenever we do that Monday morning warm up and we schedule them, sometimes they'll even say, all right, I want to do this and it's going to be a workshop. Or I want to do this one and it's going to be like a pair design process, something like that. So this has been super helpful for us. Some last little bits before I end here, because I think I'm short on time. We invite visitors. Working on a design tool and having a design audience, we think it's important to educate the company on what design is and how it works. This is really helpful for anyone on customer support or anyone in sales or anyone that's engaging with customers who need to understand design pretty well. So it's hard to scale this. We're about 160 people in the company now. And when we were like 30 or 40, this was a lot easier. So now what we do is we limit it to one person. It's a kind of a backlog. But we have them, we join, they can be silent the whole time. It just helps to kind of take it all in. And we have little guidelines for them. We send them this, we send them a survey afterward, and it really helps them to deepen their understanding of how design works. This is something we've really enjoyed doing. Another thing we've done that I recommend is saving good critiques. So it's easy to forget to do this. It's easy to have an amazing crit and totally forget about it 2 weeks later. So we actually try to keep a Notion doc around of our favorite critiques. And those could be things that the file was really well set up. The context was really well structured. The feedback someone got was really, really helpful. We need to do this more. In fact, I cut the screenshot very intentionally because we only added 3 to this. So I can't say that we've been doing this as well as I want us to, but we want to continue to remember to add these great moments so that people can reference them, especially new members of the team who are trying to learn ways of doing this over time and see what's working and what isn't for people. Couple of last notes. We take notes, especially we have someone working, Nico, in Germany, and so it helps, given the time difference, to make sure that we keep notes. In order to avoid problems like gender bias that can happen around volunteering for doing things like this, we actually have a rotation and we just go through the rotation. So next up would be Heather, after that Catherine, then Shayna, then Jenny, and we would kind of rotate all the way through. This just makes sure that we have an even balanced perspective taking the notes. And also, taking notes kind of takes you out of the meeting. So it's hard to do it if you want to also participate. So we also wanted to balance it that way. And so if someone needs to be a part of that conversation, we might skip to the next person and go back to them later. This next tip isn't relevant right now, but when you're back in your offices, I recommend small rooms over big boardrooms. Big boardrooms feel scary. They add this certain levity to a meeting that can feel like a little bit intense. And if you can, even squeezing people into a tight small room, I feel like still feels a little bit more comfortable to me than like a really big boardroom. And then, keep time the best you can if you can. Usually I take that role and try to keep facilitating in certain ways and make sure that, even if we have to cut it off, just being diligent about that to be fair to the other people. I think this is the last one. Feedback is a whole other topic. We could do an entire other just on how to give good feedback, and I think that would be probably pretty interesting someday. Nico on our team put this together, and we can share this out later, but this is kind of like ways to make sure that your feedback is actually elevating someone's work and isn't like a personal attack, isn't something that is misinformed, like trying to remember basically like there are so many different ways to deliver feedback. Even there's whole books about this, like Radical Candor is quite popular. And so just trying to remind each other when that feedback is healthy and when it feels like it might be unhealthy is also helpful. So just as a reminder, this is like what our week looks like. Those are our critiques. We have a bunch of challenges looking forward. We have too many people now, so we're trying to figure out how to split it up. We often have more topics than we have crits, so we might add a 3rd crit. We have lately, as the company scaled, too many visitors, so we're thinking maybe we'll have them only join via Zoom, or maybe we'll record it and send it along. We don't see a lot of pair design happening, so we want to improve that. So these are just like what's on our mind for what's next. Thank you.
Awesome. Noah, Linda, Matt, Debbie, thank you all so much. That was really, really cool. And it actually sounds like maybe a feedback session next time could work really well too and could pair well with this. But just a reminder, beyond the feedback session, please drop any suggestions for topics that you might have in chat before you take off. I'd definitely love to make this as relevant as possible and to keep these going. So we have a couple minutes left. If it's okay, I might ask just the group some of the questions that came in. And like I said, we'll collect all of these and send them out afterwards as well. Noah, this one might be a little bit more relevant to you, but I'm sure there are, but are there instances where maybe you and the team don't have time for a cool down or a warm up just because of project urgencies and different deadlines and things like that? Like, are there ways to get around that? Or are there ways to kind of encourage that same feeling without taking the time?
Good question. We've never canceled one. I mean, usually what that means is one person or 2 people can't go, and that's fine, and that'll happen. We'll usually just follow up afterward and say, hey, did you have a great topic? And we'll kind of just figure it out over asynchronously. With the cooldowns, I think those are the times where it's actually the most important if you're feeling overwhelmed or if you're feeling like there's a lot of stuff going on. So even if that means that particular time block doesn't work, I would hope that at least the rest of the team or the manager working with that person can find a time to check in with them. Because I think those, it's when things are going the best where sometimes those meetings, they're helpful and they're fun, but they're not as not as interesting if they don't reveal as much. So I think definitely encourage you to try to keep them if you can, maybe shrink them down or find other ways of sharing, maybe even asynchronously if you have to.
So a little bit separate from the actual critique, but like throughout the design process, does anyone here open up their Figma files for, not only designers, but engineers and PMs to also comment and give feedback on throughout the way? Like, is that seen as maybe a part of the critique?
We open ours up to like the CEO and content strategists and just other people who are participants. We found that Figma is a pretty quick learn for most people, so they can come in and start leaving comments, or it's especially great for our content strategists because they can actually noodle with the type in real life and see how it's going to fit with the design.
And we also have a pretty small, tight-knit group of people too. So like our front-end engineer's in on our design reviews as well. So he's seeing that process from the get-go. And then we also try to do a little bit of a handoff when things are further down the line.
We found too, like the Figma commenting is great, and they almost sometimes substitute having to hop on like a Slack call. I'll be real time having conversations with various people, which has been really awesome, and maybe on some like just stranger off working hours. But generally, we really encourage early feedback often, and using Figma to get that has been really helpful.
I love that a lot. And then maybe one last question to kind of wrap things up. Like, I know we're all at a little bit larger size companies now, but we're small. We were all small at a time. Do you have any separate feedback that might help those at startups or really small stage companies with really small teams? Like, are there pieces of advice that you might give them for those designers there to handle critiques in a better way, or does the process change when you're really small versus when you get larger?
I think that, to Linda's point earlier, no matter your size, like design critiques, design reviews in various forms are super important. And I personally think like creating this is just a personal opinion, but creating a level of structure and process around them for certain people who might not fully understand sort of the point or the goal behind the meeting is really important and critical. So even though we might be speaking a little bit larger scale, I still think a lot of this could apply, and people would feel excited and empowered to do so even at smaller stage.
Yeah, and I loved all of the different types of critiques that Noah shared. I remember there was a blog post or something that you posted about those critiques, and I took a screenshot of it. It was like, we got to do this. But I think that that's like a choose your own adventure. No matter what size your team is, you can kind of create your own best way for critique. There is no like right or wrong answer on how to do it.
I think one thing that it changed for us when we were really small to when we got bigger is when I first started on the team, we were 3 designers, and the crits like actually helped a lot by adding certain engineers. Like there are engineers that I kind of wish could still come, but we're too many people now. So I think one difference I noticed is in a really small size, it's okay to like bring in people who maybe they're engineers who care about design. Maybe they're not even on the project, but they could actually have a really valuable outside perspective. I would definitely encourage both the advice of like, do it anyway, because I've heard of small companies not doing crits because they don't feel like they need to yet, but I actually think it's really helpful and it builds culture early, but also just inviting those other people you wouldn't normally think to have in crits, but who might be valuable while you're at the size that you can afford to do that.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're time. Everyone, just want to say thank you again. Thanks for spending an hour, both our panelists and everyone who joined. It's really great to have everyone. It's good just to like see humans again and have some contact. So it sounds like there's a big desire for slides. Definitely going to do our best to collect those and share those out. As was mentioned in the chat, this will also be sent out after. We're going to tweet it and email everyone who is on the webinar today. If you do have topics, like find Noah, myself, Azra, tweet us, email us. I'm Joey, Jay Banks at figma.com, and then there's Azra at figma.com. And then these are going to happen at a different time each week. So don't worry if you can't always make the lunchtime one. We're going to try to mix these up for everyone. Finally, we do have a Slack that we're opening up for folks to join. If you're interested in hanging out more or sharing different topics, or honestly just coming together during these kind of wild times, would love to have you there. So just want to wrap up by saying thanks again for joining, stay safe, and thanks for hanging out with us for the hour today.
Thanks, Joey.
Yeah, bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks everyone.